to 100, maybe 110 executives from housing counseling agencies around the country on the call. We've got over 200 for the first time registered for the call. We've already got 128 on the line and more adding. So very glad to have you on, glad to have all the great participation. What we're going to do is we're going to spend most of the call talking with Sarah Jarik from HUD, and she'll be our primary attraction. And then we'll spend a few minutes touching on a few things that are in progress that we're working on at the end of the call, but want to leave as much time as we can for discussion and questions. And I know you'll all be interested in diving in. So as usual, if you do have questions and thoughts, you can always do them through the chat box, and Matthew will be our star question relayer, and he will bring them up to us as we go along. And if you want to call in, you please don't do that through VoIP or through your computer. Please do that as a separate telephone call. The number's on your screen, and you want to enter your PIN number after that to be able to ask a question, and then you raise your hand on the screen. Matthew will look out for raised hands, and we'll have a chance to take, we may be able to take a chance on a few calls coming directly in. But the chat box is fine if you want to use it. So we're very pleased to have Sarah Jarik with us. As you know, she is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Housing Counseling at HUD, and she's the head of the new Office of Housing Counseling. Sarah's been a dynamic and positive force in our business. We really appreciate all that she's been doing, and we want to give her as much feedback and information as we can. So Sarah, I want to welcome you on the call. And maybe we should start off a little bit. I know there's a lot of conversation about certification for counselors and the testing coming up. So tell us what you can about the certification world and what we should know.
Well, thanks so much, Bruce. And I wanted to say first, I'm really honored that the National Housing Resource Center invited me to speak to all of you leaders in housing counseling today. And I want to thank you for your work, which is in the best of times challenging and difficult. It's not often boring, but it can be really tough. And I want to just thank you on behalf of all of my colleagues here at HUD for what each of you do every day. And it's important for us to have opportunities to communicate with you, especially to respond to your concerns or questions and to hear from you about trends, promising practices, or areas where that you think we may need to know about. We, in fact, can be very isolated here in Washington or in federal offices around the country, and so the communication is really important, and that makes calls like this one very meaningful to us. But I did want to just mention that there are lots of ways to communicate with me and with my colleagues in the Office of Housing Counseling. Our email, housing.counseling@hud.gov, does get reviewed every day, and if you have a question or suggestion, you can use that. If you have not signed up for our listserv, you can request that. Please subscribe to our Bridge newsletter, and if you have ideas for articles, we welcome those. And I would also just like to take a minute to encourage you to visit our website if you haven't recently. It's at hud.gov/housing counseling, all one word. And if you go to the section on resources for counseling professionals, we're putting up new information every day about training materials, our handbook, and other online materials that you might find useful. So I just want to remind you, occasionally go visit there and see if there's something that's useful to you. Bruce asked me to talk about the topic of housing counselor certification, which I gather is a topic of interest among the counseling community. And so I'm going to just talk a little about the context of counselor certification and also about what I can and can't talk about. and then maybe I'll take questions from you all and from Bruce on the topic as we go along. The idea of certifying housing counselors, individual counselors, originates in the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act of 2010. And that act actually is very specific, directing the Office of Housing Counseling to create and certify individual counselors who have passed an examination in 6 subject areas. And so the way that government works, and I'm amazed by how much of it is just right along the lines of a 6th grade civics class, is that we implement the statute by regulation. And in this case, we published a draft regulation implementing certain provisions of the statute, and counselor certification is not the only provision. That regulation is the way that we seek comments on what we're about to do, and we received 215 comments on the counseling regulation that we proposed. That regulation, that comment period is closed, and we are in a deliberation period where we are reviewing and will respond to every single comment that was made. While we're in deliberation process, we are not permitted to consider comments that come outside of the regulation comment process at regulations.gov. So any comments or editorial opinions you have for the proposed rule or the way that we implement, you are free to express, but we cannot consider them if they were not part of the official comments. I will say, since we received 215 comments, I have not read every one of them, but I think it's safe to assume an awful lot of concerns were expressed in those comments. I am also not permitted to share with you what our final rule or deliberations might look like. We are in a period, and until we publish a final rule, that I can't make forward-looking comments about that. So I will do 2 things, though, that I think will be helpful for the call, and I'll certainly try to answer questions within those limitations. One thing is I'll tell you a little bit about the timeline for what will happen and what you can expect in the major milestones. I also want to talk about what is factual. And so what's in the statute, the reasons for counselor certification in the statute, and what I can answer factual questions about what we proposed in the draft rule, although that may not be the final rule. Let me pause a minute just to, if Bruce wants to make any comment or clarification before I go into a little more about the timing and the purpose of the rule. You can steer me here, Bruce.
No, I think you're doing fine. I think I would encourage people to be as frank as they want to be in expressing what thoughts they have about the certification process or other things with HUD. That you shouldn't hold back. I think Sarah is very clear about what she can and cannot do under the rules, but that doesn't mean that we can't have an open discussion among ourselves on these kind of issues.
Beautiful. Thank you. You know, I think I'd like to start with just a reminder about why having a certification process for housing counselors could be a very good idea. And I think why it wound up in the statute, although I was not part of that legislative process at all, and there is not a lot in the legislative record that I'm aware of. But a number of reasons that having a government certification for housing counselors can be good. I mean, you will become a card-carrying HUD-certified housing counselor on a government roster. And as we know, not only does that give a credentialed degree of professionalism to an industry that is occasionally considered not as professional as I think we all know that it is. So it's both an image and it's also a actual earned degree, if you will, or status. The areas that are required to be tested in the statute are actually quite important to providing good service to the consumer. And just to reiterate what those areas are, the statute requires that counselors pass an examination in 6 areas. Actually, I'll read you the statement. Housing counselors need to demonstrate by written examination competency to provide counseling in each of the following areas, and there are 6. Financial management, which under HUD rules all of you do. Property maintenance, which may not be something that's emphasized very much, but if we remember that every consumer comes to us with a housing need issue or lives in housing, understanding what the physical environment involves is important. The third is responsibilities of homeownership and tenancy, what it means to be a tenant or a homeowner, and what those responsibilities are. Fair housing laws and requirements, housing affordability, and the last one is avoidance of and responses to rental and mortgage delinquency and avoidance of eviction and mortgage default. So yes, there are 6 areas. I venture to guess that very few counselors today would rate themselves highly competent in all 6 areas. But the goal of the certification examination is to say any counselor should be able to have a basic knowledge in these areas in order to provide good guidance. Anticipating a question that we get a lot is, does every counselor actually have to offer counseling in these areas? For example, I am a counselor who only deals with mortgage delinquency and default. Do I now have to take clients who are looking to get a rental apartment? And HUD's answer to that has been in our program, no. You are permitted, your agencies are permitted to identify which areas you specialize in your work plan. If the agency specialty is mortgage delinquency and default, they do not have to offer direct services for tenancy. However, we do expect a counselor and the agency to be able to make an intelligent referral. And in the case of mortgage delinquency, in the example I just gave, if the client will have to relocate and may have an involuntary loss of the home, being able to discuss a rental option and make the rental referral is a logical extension of the counseling. So those are the competency areas. That's a little bit about the justification for the rule in our view, and the benefits of the rule. A last benefit of the rule is that we cannot fund agencies unless the counselors, a majority of the counselors are certified, and certified counselors must deliver services for certain HUD programs. A plus of this is that certified counselors are likely to become more in demand in the field. A negative is that agencies and HUD will need to worry about turnover and making sure that the counselors are primarily certified. Many of the provisions do fall directly from the statute. And I can, let me again pause shortly to ask Bruce and Matt if there are questions at this point, or if I should share some of the features of the statute that may be useful for this audience to know.
Matthew?
I do have one question that I'll put out there. So the question is, can a non-approved, non-certified agency, such as realtor, bank, credit repair shops, nonprofit, able to promote that they have a HUD-certified counselors on staff? So can a non-HUD approved agency promote having HUD-certified counselors on staff?
That's a great question. In the draft rule that we published, HUD said that only certified counselors could be certified only if they worked for HUD-approved agencies. So we, in our draft rule, we proposed limiting the approval only if the counselor was employed by a HUD-approved agency and not by the others you mentioned. I'll mention a couple other. Now that was an example of an area that was not addressed in statute, but that we proposed in our draft rule. I need to get to the timing, so let me do that first, and then do feel free, I guess, to interrupt if questions come in. As I mentioned before, we're in the deliberation process. That takes some time. We will be considering each of the comments. We will have to draft a final rule that will go through a legal and departmental clearance as well as to OMB before it is finalized. In the draft rule, what we proposed was once the final rule is published, and I anticipate it will be many months from now, then counselors would have 1 year to become certified, which means that the clock would tick on taking an examination and receiving certification from HUD. The exact timing of that can't be known until we have the final rule published, but the idea would be to allow sufficient time so that all of the counselors who are affected by this had time to receive training, take the test, perhaps more than once if they did not pass it the first time, and be in compliance 1 year after the final rule. So as a rule of thumb, we think about this as an initiative that's around our fiscal 2015 year, which it does start October 1st of 2014, but it really depends on when that final rule gets published. The one feature of the statute that is not something we could address by rule is that the statute, a question comes up, well, I've taken a lot of examinations. I'm examined and certified by my state or by a local entity. I'm certified by another professional organization. I'm certified, I meet national industry standards. Do any of these other forms of certification or these other examinations allow me to be grandfathered in to the HUD certification? And the answer is no, because of the language of the statute. The Act language does not give us discretion to pick and choose who may take the examination. The statute requires all individuals that provide counseling under HUD programs be HUD certified by way of passing the examination. The law didn't allow language for exclusion. In 2014, HUD did propose language that would give some flexibility on this topic. It was not adopted in the budget appropriation bill, and we are not permitted to speculate about legislative change during rulemaking. But I just wanted you to know as a factual matter that the ability to grandfather is limited by statute. Are there additional questions, Steve?
Yeah, I have a few that I can run by you. So if you could just, and this is kind of going back to the first question, if you could just clarify So the question is, so what about a counselor who is certified while working at a HUD-approved agency, but then moves on to a non-HUD-approved group?
The rule that we proposed would have dropped that counselor's eligibility from the roster of HUD-certified housing counselors.
And then if they were subsequently re-employed by a HUD-approved agency, then their certification would be kind of re-triggered. Is that correct?
The rule certainly envisioned employment by a HUD-approved agency to maintain their eligibility. I don't recall off the top of my head how detailed we got into transitions in jobs in that way, but their ability to be on the roster would be linked to a HUD-approved agency, and we expected they would be able to move from one to another.
Great. I think that answers the questions. If you could just say whatever you can about the monetary costs that either in the proposal or anything that you can say about that.
That's a great question. In the proposed rule, and actually the government process for issuing a proposed rule, we have to do an analysis of the impact of the rule on small businesses, and most counseling agencies are small businesses. And we also had an estimate of the cost of the testing. Our research on this showed many different costs depending on how the test was delivered and how and what model we looked to. I believe in the draft rule we noted that an average cost might be $500 to become certified, and that was a number that I know we received quite a few comments on. The exact amount for the test would be decided at the time that we finalized the rule and had a contractor in place, but we will definitely, in implementing the rule, we would be guided by the comments and our ability to meet the needs of the industry balanced by the needs of having a secure and reliable test that can't be cheated on. So those are some of the factors involved.
Great. Just one other underlying issue here is who pays for that?
Mm-hmm. The proposed rule had a phrase in it, and again, I don't have this memorized, so please you'll give me a little leeway here. But I think it anticipated that individual counselors would pay for their test because the certification is individual, and as the first question indicated, the counselor carries that certification with them. And so the rule made a statement along the lines that HUD would anticipate that the individual would pay. The rule did not require the individual to pay, and we received comments on who pays as well. And so whether we require a particular stakeholder to pay or whether we permit payment from different sources would be a matter for the final rule.
All right, we have some more questions. One, if you could just real quickly go back over the effective dates. So the question is, does this mean that when the final rule is published, from that date the counselor has 1 year to get certified?
That is correct. That's how the proposed rule was written. I believe we received comments on that as well, so I can't say that's the final decision, but that's what the proposed rule stated.
All right. Has HUD considered tailoring the new rule to allow for counselors to take third-party examinations after the final rule goes into effect that would demonstrate the counselor's understanding of the 6 areas? The person says this would be distinct from grandfathering because the counselors would in fact take a new exam that HUD could determine fully complies with the Dodd-Frank requirements. So I guess has HUD considered allowing for the third-party test to be given?
That's such a great question. Yes, we have. And actually that is a statute directive, not a rule directive. The statute requires us to contract with an entity, one entity, to administer the test, so that it does not give us the discretion to permit other test providers to provide a test that HUD could deem was equivalent. This was another area where HUD proposed, I would say, a minor change to statute that would permit more than one entity to administer the test, and that our proposal was not adopted by Congress in the appropriations process. So the statute today still limits the test to being conducted by one entity.
Great. A related question is kind of the same thing relative to the training. So which organizations are authorized to provide education to prepare for the test? Will HUD publish brochures or some type of literature to assist in educating counselors?
The couple pieces of answer to that, and let me just make sure I get this right. The HUD will offer training connected with the test, so that there will be training modules put out that counselors can choose to take or not before they go to the examination. HUD encourages housing counselors to educate themselves on the Dodd-Frank Act competency topics, and there are training providers today who are offering training on those topics. The classes can't be designed specifically to prepare for the test because that's going to be linked to our delivery of the test, but certainly being educated on those topics would be wise. And we are also looking at whether we can start making available sample questions or get the types of things we may look at and offer even training modules as early as possible. So I don't know if we'll be able to do that or not, but we recognize the need to get materials out as soon as possible, and we're trying to do that. I will say there were a number of comments relating to the content of the tests and standards, so that we don't want to get ahead of putting questions and training materials out and then make changes in the content because of the feedback we've received.
I know we got. I know you got many comments about the challenges of the test in the reverse mortgage field. Had been that the trainings didn't match the test content well, and we just want to encourage HUD to be sensitive to that. The test shouldn't be kind of unnecessarily challenging. It should really be focused on content, and training should match that really well.
I appreciate the comment, which I'm not allowed to take into account right now. I'm smiling.
But you've heard it before. That's
we did get that comment in the rules. I will say, as a policy matter, it's tricky, right, to say whether who and whether we need to weed out folks from the counseling field, and whether a test is a vehicle to do that. I'll put myself forward as somebody who's a pretty good test taker and not a great counselor. And so if, and I say that because I lack empathy, patience, and you know, the skills and behavior change that counselors require. Those are very hard to test for in a test that's not expensive and easily accessible, and you know, and not a burden. So we know, I think, that an examination will only focus on one facet of what's involved in the job of counseling. The question whether the test should be hard or easy, how you define that, and what's meaningful for us at HUD, I think we have to look at this as what is quality counseling, how will it be delivered, and keeping in mind this should be a very basic certification element. This is, we hope, will be a kind of a common ground standard for counseling who will then have additional knowledge in more specialized areas. And given that, I would think that certainly aligning the training and the test is important, but also that the level of knowledge required for the test should be what's required to provide basic housing counseling services.
All right, so we have a long queue of questions, and I don't imagine we're going to get to them all, so I just will apologize in advance to folks that we don't get to, and we'll try to follow up offline. Is it all right if we take one or two more? All right, so the first, is counselor certification required for agency certification by HUD or receipt of HUD funding?
It will be. That's in the statute. HUD may not make grants unless, I believe it's the majority of counselors are certified. It may be all, and that's an important point I should know, and I don't want to misspeak. It's addressed in the statute and the rule. Agencies are permitted to employ non-certified counselors, but if they are working with clients on HUD programs, they must be certified. So we did provide, I believe, in the rule or got comments on the need for transition and the recognition that not everyone employed in the housing counseling program will be a certified counselor. But the expectation is that when the rule, after the rule effective date, agency approval will include a review of the certification status of the counselors, as it does with the reverse mortgage program now.
Great. There have been a few questions around both kind of continuing education and whether there's going to be any recertification requirement.
The proposed rule did not specify, the proposed rule envisioned that the test and certification would only occur once. The statute did not provide for continuing education. So this is very simply a requirement to pass an examination in the 6 Dodd-Frank competency areas. I believe we received comments on that as well. And it's so it's something we need to consider further.
Great. I'll just kind of check on the time. Do we want to do a few more questions, or do we want to? I think that's fine. What? So well, go ahead. Oh, so Sarah, do you want to keep going then?
I can take a couple more. I just want to be respectful of your agenda, but I'm fine.
All right. There have been a few questions on how many attempts a counselor will have to take the test. Can you speak to that at all?
I don't believe that was addressed in the draft rule, meaning that the counselors can retake the test. And I don't believe that there were limits placed on that in the draft rule. That was a topic of comment that we'd have to consider.
If you so I think one thing I'm confused about here is if I have a staff of 5 people, and currently they're counselors, and 2 of them take the test and pass, so it's not a majority of the people on staff. But then would we then say that what you were describing would say that you were no longer a HUD-approved housing counseling agency that could provide housing counseling delivery? Or would you simply say we've got 2 HUD-certified counselors and the other 3 people are assistants or something? When you said it had to be a majority, had to be approved as counselors.
Yeah, I'm really going to have to defer back to the rule and the statute, and I apologize for creating confusion around this. My belief is that, well, no, let me not confuse it further. Let's just say that I really don't know well enough off the top of my head to answer that.
I do have a question. It's a bit off topic, but I think it's kind of worth raising here. It's on the FHA Back to Work program. The question is whether you've seen a fee structure being suggested as a general operating practice with this program being in its infancy.
I'm really glad the question was asked, and I'm actually going to pose a little question back myself. So for those of you on the call who aren't familiar with this, FHA has announced, actually is working on a series of policies to incorporate housing counseling in FHA insured loan origination and servicing. Back to Work was one initiative that was rolled out in August, and the idea was that folks affected by the recession, for example, and lost their home or had periods of unemployment that led to poor credit were being closed out of reapplying for an FHA-insured loan until 3 years or even more had passed from that event. And Back to Work allows them to apply for a mortgage after 1 year if they have a good payment history and if they worked with a pre-purchase housing counseling agency. We have not seen, let me say, we would love feedback on how the program is going in the field. You can use our mailbox, housing.counseling@hud.gov. If you have clients who have received loans or are getting them and want to spotlight them for us, that would be great. If you've seen barriers and want us to know about them, I'd love to hear about them. The issue of ranging for fees and getting fees in the program is important. We tried to make it clear that we expected counseling to be paid for by a number of parties who are approved to pay for counseling now, including lenders and including consumers. We get into dangerous ground if we talk about setting prices here centrally or even among the field, and so I have not expected to see a common pricing strategy there, as there isn't one in counseling in general. HUD rules look at pricing in terms of reasonableness compared to cost and reasonableness compared to the local market, but we don't regulate prices beyond that. I don't know whether the questioner had a specific insight in mind. I think I know the most from the National Housing Resource Center Back to Work page, which is an invaluable service in connecting consumers, lenders, and counselors together. So I don't know more than that. If I may, I just want to mention that we have 2 other sets of initiatives that are in design on the default side to connect borrowers in default to housing counselors, and in pre-purchase for first-time home buyers to get incentives for going to housing counseling perhaps very early in the process and after the closing occurs, and in exchange getting reductions in the amount of mortgage insurance premium they have to pay. It would be very helpful for us to know of state and local models that work well in similar programs, and the compensation that is offered in specific programs. Again, we won't be setting pricing, but we may have examples or recommendations, and would be interested in hearing more. So I'm glad that question came up.
And I think, so one of the things that we have coming up in the future is that we'll have our meeting in Los Angeles, and Sarah's one of our guests at the meeting, and I'm hoping we'll have a deeper dive in the potential programs that might be developed to incentivize people to come to counseling and to support counseling. And I hope we have, I hope people bring some of their experience and knowledge in the field, and we'll have a chance to do some deeper dive into some of the ideas about how this might work and how it might be a sustainable program for our organizations and for HUD.
Yeah.
So let me ask a question, which I get a lot, and I assume you get as well, which is, how are things coming along with the NOFA, and when will it come out?
The NOFA.
Housing funding.
I'm not allowed to say. This is so frustrating. This is not my favorite part of government. The exact date and notice was issued is actually both not within our control, and if we speculate on it, there's fairness issues for those who happen to be on this call and may know more than those who aren't. So I really can't say. What I can say is check grants.gov. Make sure you're in that system properly. Make sure that the email addresses you put in that system are the people who will be monitoring those boxes, and update your email address on our listserv if you're not on it already, or make sure you have the right person on it, because we do announce the grant availability through our listserv. And again, you can do that by going to housing.counseling@hud.gov and requesting to be added to the email address, and we'd be happy to do that. We sent a notice recently reminding people to update their information, and I would encourage you to do that.
We're all looking forward to it. Looks like we've got more questions in the queue.
Yeah, and again, I'm going to apologize. We're not going to get to all of them, but I will just quickly share. We know you can't consider this, but just want to get it out there for the folks who have expressed this. People urging that you consider extending the rollout date for the counselor certification. And then just doubling back to what you were just discussing. So the question is, did I hear Sarah correctly? Pre-post-purchase counseling can help reduce the PMI consumers pay. So could you just explain that again briefly?
I didn't. It's not PMI. Let me say again. The one initiative we're looking at is really tied to the FHA insured mortgages. So with FHA, there's a portion of there are fees involved in mortgage insurance premiums that are part of the cost of an FHA loan. There's an upfront mortgage insurance premium that's paid and usually part of the loan amount, so it's paid out monthly and amortized as part of the monthly payments. And then there's an annual mortgage insurance premium associated with an FHA loan. The model we're looking at is that for first-time home buyers, if they get counseling from a HUD-approved agency before contract of sale, at key times of making the decision. So very early on in shopping for a home and shopping for a loan, if they get another touch with a housing counselor before the closing, so they can do a budget on the home and loan they're purchasing. And then if they agree to meet with the housing counselor after closing in the first year, then FHA is looking to reduce the mortgage insurance premium so that the loan is more affordable and less expensive for that first-time home buyer compared to first-time home buyers who didn't get housing counseling. While this would be an initiative for FHA, we would hope that other industry partners would consider it a good idea, where clients who had made the commitment to housing counseling hopefully would be eligible for better pricing in the private market as well. And so it's sort of a attempt to create a a seal of approval, or I am a HUD-counseled prospective borrower, first-time home buyer, and both the lender, FHA, and the first-time home buyer would all benefit from having more knowledge. The initiative is called HAWK, Homeowners Armed with Knowledge, and our idea is that if the first-time home buyer is willing to make the commitment to housing counseling, work with the counselor throughout the process, that they should get incentives or rewards for doing so, at least from FHA. It'll make a better loan pool for FHA, and obviously better family affordability and sustainability. So I hope that answered the question.
I mean, this is an excellent and exciting program and has, I think, very much the kind of thing we are hoping that will help institutionalize housing counseling in the future, build us into the process, and create some sustainable models. So this is very exciting, and hopefully we'll spend more time on this in the meeting in Los Angeles. So Matthew, we've got some more questions.
Yeah, I think maybe just one more. This is from an intermediary that I think a lot of the intermediaries on the call will be interested in. So the question is, does the certification eliminate counseling agencies from being accepted by their connection to an intermediary? Will each counseling agency have to be approved by HUD regardless of their connection to an intermediary?
You know, it's an interesting question. I want to make sure I answer it correctly. Housing counseling agencies that are HUD approved on our list, on our website, get referrals, whether they're subgrantees, whether they're local housing counseling agencies, they all have to meet HUD standards. Excuse me, that's my phone, and shoot. I'm sorry about that. But they all have to be HUD approved. In the case of a subgrantee of an intermediary, the intermediary has the responsibility and the benefit of ensuring that the subgrantee meet HUD standards, and this is certainly one of those standards. So it does not change the relationship between subs and intermediaries in any way. Today there are standards that anyone working in the HUD program has to adhere to, whether they are working through an intermediary or as a local housing counseling agency.
But just to clarify, it won't be a requirement. So if you are not a HUD-approved housing counseling agency, but you're a subgrantee of an intermediary, you still can get housing counseling funds through that intermediary. You do not need to be separately approved. And secondly, that if your counselors take the test, will they also be considered working for a HUD-approved housing counseling agency, even though their specific agency isn't HUD-approved?
All right, let me do one question at a time. The first question is that actually, Bruce, you're going to start again. Can you do that?
Sure. Yeah.
Let him up.
Okay. So question number one is an agency is not a HUD approved currently. If it contracts, if it's a subgrantee of an intermediary, HUD funds can flow through the intermediary to the housing counseling agency.
I need to just correct the nomenclature there.
Okay.
Subgrantees are HUD approved because of their affiliation with an intermediary. So if an intermediary is receiving funds and giving it to a subgrantee, they are HUD approved and they are on our website. They do not get a direct HUD approval from HUD like a local housing counseling agency does, but they are still a HUD approved agency and they are expected to adhere to our requirements, and they report to us right through the intermediary. So I don't think the right term is HUD approved. They are all HUD approved, whether they're a subgrantee or a local. They don't have a separate local housing counseling agency designation, and they don't need one in order to receive funds if they are working through an intermediary, an HFA. Okay.
Okay, so I think that clarifies number two, but let me just ask it directly to be sure. So I am a HUD approved. I am not a HUD approved housing counseling agency. I am a subgrantee of an intermediary. My counselors take the test and pass the test. So are they then able to work in my agency?
Yes, of course. So in fact, it would be they have to take the test and pass the test. Whether you're a subgrantee or a direct local housing counseling agency, at the time the rule is effective, the counselors in those agencies have to be certified in order for that agency to receive funds from HUD and be in the HUD program, whether it's as a subgrantee or as a local housing counseling agency.
Well, this has been a very helpful hour, or 50 minutes. We really appreciate the time you spent with us. I think we'll want to invite you in again. And as I said, we'll have some opportunities to talk more in depth at the Los Angeles meeting in February 26th. We thank you very much. You're welcome to stay on. We've only got a couple more things we want to go over quickly before the call is over. But this has been a terrific conversation, and we'd like to keep it going.
Well, thank you, and thank you. The questions are very, very helpful to us. I will clarify the point about who has to be certified or not, and send the answer back to Bruce so that you can distribute that. And if there are other questions that we can follow up separately, I look forward to that. But thank you again for the opportunity to speak about this. I appreciate it.
Great. So a few very quick bullet points. They're up in the queue. So we're meeting with FHFA on Monday. As you know, they're the regulator of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. It's part of a coalition meeting we're doing with the Americans for Financial Reform. They've asked us to evaluate the servicers who are non-bank servicers, who are the rising force in the industry now. So I'm sure many of you know there's been a large transfer of servicing rights, of actual mortgages being transferred from banks or regulated institutions or depository institutions. So they come under a certain regulatory regime, and they're now being transferred to agencies that are organizations that are non-bank and will be regulated by the CFPB. And Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac loans are a large part of some of these transfers. So FHFA wants to know how well it's going, that it's a new world, and they're interested in getting a really candid evaluation. So we have a very quick and dirty survey that's available to you to fill out, and we're really most interested in just trying to quantify what's working and not working, and specifically issues like, are the SPOCs accessible? Are there problems with language access? Are timelines being met? Are there problems with dual track? All the kind of mechanical things that are your daily life. We do want this information to be very recent, so in the last 2 or 3 months. And no problem if you haven't had any interactions with these particular servicers, or it's only 1 or 2, you could just pick and choose what you'd like. But we're looking for a very quick analysis that we might be able to quantify, and then give at least a very simple report to FHFA in the meeting. There'll be opportunities to, I think, do a deeper dive, as we've done in the past with many of these. But this is to give a sense of overview. And one area feel free to comment on is if there are problems with the transfer of client loans from one institution to another. And let's identify, and what they're very interested, and the CFPB will be as well, whether there are systemic problems. So the servicers that are on the list are on your screen right now, and they will be larger in our lives going forward, so it'll be very helpful to be as specific as we can by servicer. So Matthew, very quick one on the Mortgage Debt Relief Act.
Yeah, so not a lot to update as far as where things stand legislatively. There was a really good article yesterday in the New York Times that I circulated to the leaders and headlines lists, and I'll include a link in my follow-up email, but really just did a good job of drawing attention to why this is urgent. You know, had some good stories of homeowners who would be affected, who are affected. And so if you haven't already made a call to your member of Congress, this is a really good opportunity to do that. You can just, let them know that you saw this article and really want to know where they stand. I included some talking points on the slide here, but really the main point that you want to be making is that principal reduction is really one of the best options available, or the best option for a lot of homeowners who are struggling. But that if these folks end up getting a huge tax bill because of principal reduction, it's not going to be a realistic possibility for them. It's always good if you can talk about personal stories of your clients. And I included on there a way to find out if your members of Congress are co-sponsors for the bill. If they're not, then asking them to become a co-sponsor is a good ask. If you have any questions, feel free to follow up with me.
Okay, our CFPB Servicing Standards Training webinar, huge success. Over 700 people signed up, 500 people actually could get on. We're going to do a second round. Hats off to NCLR for co-sponsoring this with us and having such a big role, and NCLC. So look out on your schedule for the next available date. We're closing the mortgage closing survey for CFPB today, so thanks everybody for your contributions. It'll be useful. So, big thing on my list is Leaders in Housing Counseling meeting is coming up on February 26th. It looks like we're going to have a jam-packed agenda. So there's going to be a lot of thinking about what we should be doing. We hope you will be bringing in some of your experience and insight. We are very interested in trying to make a good, solid plan for 2014 on all we want to be doing on advocacy, on financial reform, on in building housing counseling into the mortgage process and servicing process in this country. We've got big things we want to talk about, and we have some little things we want to talk about as well. But these meetings are hugely valuable. This is really what drives a lot of our program. You guys have been such a major part of helping shape what we're going to be doing, what we did in the past, and it'll be really helpful to have you be there in the future. We'll have the morning will be a 2-hour session with the members of National Housing Resource Center. Yay for them! And we will have a lunch for them as well, and our guests. And then the afternoon will be a full agenda. We'll have Eileen Fitzgerald, CEO of NeighborWorks, who does do a lot of thinking about housing counseling in the world and has some interesting insights in it. We'll have Hala Farid from Citibank. We have a couple other people in the process trying to work their schedules out to get to us. We'll have Sarah Jarek, who was really terrific in the one we did a year and a couple months ago, and I think we'll ask Sarah both to be insightful about HUD, but also sort of the broader themes in our business, and that will always be good. But, you know, also it'll be your peers, it'll be your people who are doing the same kind of work around the country, and we have a broad range of experience, and having it's very interesting. It's always very interesting to see what contributions people have, what insights they have, and how we're going to shape this our advocacy for the upcoming year. We need you in the conversation, because this really is what makes us work. And on that note, we are going to do a quick closeout. We'll have a regular call in 2 weeks. Please think about joining NHRC if you haven't already. There's many benefits you get from the organization, but you know, really, the reason people join is because you want to help support this kind of work and help us grow and help us become bigger and more effective organization. And your contributions, your involvement has been really helps financially as well as on the idea basis. There are the benefits of the discounted credit reports. We do have some other discounts and programs on fundraising and supplies. We're also looking at doing some webinars that will be just for member organizations that will help you around, especially around compliance issues and things like that. We'll do a range of activities, and joining really helps make this work a success. So until we talk to you in 2 weeks, keep an eye out on the listserv. There'll be a few more initiatives hitting and there'll be a survey we're going to put out soon about what you would like to see us and how you'd like to see NHRC be more effective. And you need your thinking caps on that, and that'll be one of the discussion topics in Los Angeles as well. All right, everybody, have a good weekend, and really appreciate your contribution.